Merry Christmas.
Hi, Cort. How are you?
I'm good, Anna Marie. How are you?
I'm good. I want to welcome you to our podcast where we share our stories of magic and the memory of Christmas. So, Cort, what would you like to share with us?
So I've been thinking about this a lot. I mean, I think rather than share, any one specific Christmas memory, I'm going to kind of share what I remember the most strongly is sort of like how Christmas went for a couple of years, so sort of like a series of events. So growing up, my brother and I, we were altar servers, and so Christmas always began with like the Christmas Eve mass, whether it was 4 o'clock or 8 o'clock. So there was always the process of getting dressed and getting driven over to church, and all of the occurrences that would be going on at church. So of course the church would be decorated and there'd be music going on in the background, and people were dressed nicer than they usually would, and there were Christmas lights up and everything. And there was just a lot more ceremony, on Christmas Eve mass, and that always kind of just set the tone, because as an altar server you're kind of like part of it, you know what I mean?
Right.
And so, inevitably we would go through church and there'd be all sorts of things and there'd be lots of kids there. And then what would happen is, mass would be over, and then, we would all go over to one of our parents' friends' house. Their names were the Mullins, and they lived in the same neighborhood as we did. So we'd go over, and like our other cousins would be there, and of course them and their kids would be there. So there'd be a whole bunch of kids, all of different ages, and and everyone would be dressed. And of course, the Mullins house was decorated with Christmas decorations, and
Hmm.
so we'd all be kind of enjoying that, enjoying food, and cookies and things that were very good.
Uh-huh.
They would often have, for a bunch of the years, they would have a Santa come to the house,
Wow.
and so that was always exciting, and it was always particularly exciting for the younger kids, to see that. And Santa would sit down in front of, they had a fireplace, and we'd go through all the what do you want for Christmas sort of thing, and all of that sort of event. So that was always really fun. And then inevitably the night would kind of start to wrap up, and so we'd all kind of go out of the house. And by then, in New Jersey during Christmas time, it's always dark pretty early, usually around 5:15. So we'd be getting out, we'd be leaving these people's house probably at 8 and 9 o'clock at night. So it was already nighttime, and of course all the neighborhood was decorated with Christmas lights. It was almost always cold, so you had that crisp feeling in the air. On occasions there was sometimes snow. There wasn't always snow, but on some occasions there was, and we'd all kind of just like pile in the car, and that's when kind of the anticipation would really start to build for going home and waking up the next day with your with whatever gifts Santa brought for you. And so as we drove home, and it wasn't far, it was like a 4 to 5 minute drive, but you'd be going through the neighborhood and you'd be seeing all how everyone decorated their house and all their Christmas lights and everything. You'd be seeing lots of people walking around, going to their own Christmas parties and everything. You know what I mean? And so then we'd get home, and when you're a little kid, you're kind of all wound up, and you have brothers and sisters, and so you'd come into the house, you'd see the tree all decorated, you'd see the lights on that, and you'd just be looking at it thinking what's going to be there the next morning.
Right.
And yeah, and so I'm sure for our parents it was always a process to get everyone into bed. But you would do that. There were of course the stockings on the fireplace,
Hmm.
that had each of our names. We would make sure we left cookies and milk out, and then we'd all go up to bed. And then there was just the waking up the next morning, you know what I mean, that early excitement. And so certainly when you were younger, you were the first one up, but then as you got older, your younger siblings would be the first one up, and they'd be the ones coming to get you. So, just that whole 12-hour process, you know what I mean, of leading up to Christmas morning was always just very, very exciting. You know what I mean? And there was so much atmosphere to it. You
Hmm.
know what I mean? It kind of just felt like Christmas. Something, when you get older, and if you don't have kids, or if there's not kids around, Christmas is certainly one of those holidays that feels different.
It
You know,
does.
Christmas just
Hmm.
makes more sense when you're a kid or when you have kids around. And so, yes, you know what I mean? It was just always a very exciting time. And yeah, you look back with fond memories.
Oh, Court, I really appreciate you taking the time to share all of that because there's so many different levels of emotion, and certainly your visual memory um, was exciting to sit and listen to because it kind of, the way you shared it, it kind of makes you feel like a kid again and remembering everything. You
Yeah, it
what?
was an exciting time. And we had so many kids in our family and in like our cousin's family. And so it was, it was a big, it was a big deal. And like our grandparents were typically at our house for Christmas. So there was always, the excitement of not just my parents and everything, but, them being part of it. And so there was just a lot of atmosphere. There was a lot of ritual in a certain way to it. And not just in terms of church, but just in terms of things you do as a family.
Right.
And, Christmas breakfast, of course. So it was just a very exciting time as a kid.
Oh, wow. Well, Court, thank you very much for saying yes to this, and I appreciate your sharing.
Thank you very much for asking.
Merry Christmas!